This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch channels. And we're happy to have tonight Colleen Avis. And this is the first time we've had her on the show. So, how are you doing tonight?
I'm so excited to be here. I've had so much fun talking to you and getting to know about your shows and audience. So thanks for having me.
We want to let everybody know we're on Newsly, that list of Newsly, that's an iOS app where you can stop scrolling and start listening. Use coupon code GHOST and you get 1 month free premium subscription. We are Newsly. They take the video and translate it to audio. They take news articles and you can get alerts and listen to on Newsly. So thank you again for being on the program. And we want to get into a couple of things tonight. You have that guitar behind you. We'll talk about that. You getting back into music, but what you do is you talk about the idea of voices, and we tell people like, what is that concept? Maybe you can explain to our audience what that means.
What sacred spaces means? Yeah. I think what's
Yeah.
most important is that anything I'm going to share is what I think the definition is to me. And I especially as I'm speaking to a musician, the idea of creativity and expressing oneself and what it means to you is equally as important. And so I'll share what it means to me. Creating a sacred space, living in a sacred space, being in a sacred space is really about leaning into what is the following of your joy, right? What is like the true purpose? Where are you in a space, whether it's in your mind, your body, your home, your car, your music studio, where you're able to be creative, where you're able to know that the uniqueness of yourself is what is so important. And so I really get excited when I get to talk to musicians and other creatives because that feeling, right, of like putting a few different chords together and it can feel really sacred. And I think the reason that it feels sacred is it's something that within you that aligns. It's like, oh, that feels good. It's speaking to my soul. So when I talk about a sacred space, I'm talking about a space that's in the mind, in the body, in the home, wherever it is that you might be residing, in between your thoughts, that feels open to you being creative and expressing your own uniqueness. That's what I think of a sacred space as.
Wow, because I kind of think of like you think about like Victorian poets and the idea of like the cathedral is nature, right? I think it
Mm,
was like I don't know, it was Longfellow. Because I'm really into romantic poets. As a musician, I first got into poetry, and
mm,
I used to read a lot of William Blake and Wordsworth and Tennyson, and Lord Byron, and the whole idea, and then the idea of this sacred space of like the church is if you think about Walden Pond, and you think of all these great like old kind of Victorian era poetry that would tend to sometimes like elevate nature in a way. And even William Blake in the Songs of Innocence and Experience, he would talk about the kind of nature being a kind of refuge or being more pure or closer to like a cosmic idea of what the universe should be. And I've always been into like the idea of the universal muse or like an idea that there's a universal tune or key
mm,
that all musicians as creative people, I like to do stream of consciousness. As I got
mm,
older, I found that if I just turn my synths on, put down the tape, actually start the tape player, the recorder, I'll just go for like an hour and just
mm.
put something down and just I'll let things just come to me because it's like everything that I think we're receivers and we're creators. And I kind of receive everything that I'm
Yes.
feeling that day and then I put it down and I let it be.
So
So I think that
I love the nature connection to the sacredness of space because we're nature, right? And even though we've insulated and isolated ourselves so much, we actually are in nature and nature is in us. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about that ability to be creative and know you are a creator, right? There's so many people that don't think of themselves as a creator or not as an artist, and we're divinely all artists, as is all things in nature divinely art, right? Like it's hard for me to look at a stream, a tree, and think that that's not art in the same way as this isn't art or your music isn't art. And it reminds, when you were speaking, it reminds me of this idea of primordial, right? Like a child laughing, wind blowing, the sound of leaves, the sound of a stream rippling, those primordial sounds. And I think that nature and those primordial sounds are really good stimulators or creative outlets or creative inspiration for us to lean into as humans to do that. So I love that you had an ancientness about what resonated for you, because primordial sounds are clearly ancient, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like one of the things is I'm a mountain biker, I'm a hiker. I live in New Hampshire, and there's tons of trails everywhere, and I'm part Cherokee and Blackfoot Indian. And what I like to do is just go out in nature. And being a synthesist and producer, I'm a very big fan of like progressive rock bands, and the famous Yes album, that Close to the Edge, where it actually opened up with a field recording of a forest. They actually went
Mm,
and mic'd a forest where streams and birds and things were just going, and they just taped it,
rain.
and then they put it into the beginning of the album, and then they have this kinda orchestral sweep where they start, and you hear this first thing you hear is nature. Then you hear
Mm,
this orchestral sweep of the whole band coming in
mm,
a kinda classical way, and that's the thing
yeah.
about, that type of music I love, and the fact that you can do that. I actually learned from a progressive band like that. They're like, "Yeah, I should go out and record nature or just be out in
Mhm,
nature and just find a happy accident of taking pictures." A lot of my pictures come from walking in the woods. A lot of
mm,
my ideas for music comes from actually being, on my mountain bike and going deep woods riding, and then sitting down and actually, watching an animal come up to me and just taking that moment and either writing a poem about it or writing a song about it later
mm.
and just use that as inspiration.
There's um there's definitely something about the simplicity and the guidance of nature that's accessible to everyone, right? I mean, even if you're living in a big city, if you're not around the beauty of New Hampshire, there is a connectedness there. Um, and I think we often feel really at home, and it can feel like a sacred space when we are in nature, whether we're simply under a tree, whether we're sitting in a field, whether we're in Central Park in New York, or we're in the woods, deep
Yeah.
in the African bush. And I just got back from Mexico yesterday. I was leading a yoga retreat, and we went into some of the ancient Mayan towns and ruins, and we were in the cenotes,
Oh, wow.
which are underground cave waters. And I have to tell you, there was a connectedness there that because of its ancientness, I think too, right? The Mayan people are still working some of that land, and the cenotes are rich in minerals, and some of them are 60, 70 feet deep, and natural water sources that are running underneath this ancient practice that the Mayans are still running on the earth's surface, right? Where they're gardening and raising their livestock and their animals and so forth. And because I tend to be quite aware, similar to I think what you're doing, it felt different there, right? Like in that nature, in their environment, in their sacred
Mhm.
space, versus when I'm in maybe the nature in New Hampshire or nature in Central Park or something like that. And it
Yeah.
is it is really beautiful to use nature as different types of inspiration. So one might feel more like jazz, one might feel more like classical music, one might feel more like rap, but like being really curious about nature and seeing what it has to offer you in that way um, can be quite
Yeah.
interesting. And
Yeah.
I'll add one of the healing practices that I use a lot with my clients is around nature. Yes, forest bathing, and yes, listening to sounds and using your senses as a way to come into the present moment. What are 5 things you see? What are 4 things you hear? What are 3 things you smell? And just using your senses to that. The other one is like take off your shoes and put your feet on the ground.
Oh,
Really
yeah. That's
literally connect with nature, people, or hug a tree, but like your skin,
Yeah.
your body, and the earth's surface literally coming into contact with one another, and just noticing what you notice and being curious about what you can learn about yourself, and knowing that you're in communication with her. You're in communication with Mother Earth when you do that.
Gaia. Yeah, you're kind of like, yeah. I think it's like a lot of indigenous people will, see that sometimes they do barefoot or closer to
Yes.
actually connection. And, it's like, if you get into Cherokee and Blackfoot, mythology and things that are part of the indigenous culture, it's just the spirit animal kind of conversations. Like
Mm,
anytime a spirit comes in front of you something, like if the eagle comes down or like a
mm.
beaver stops or deer stops in front of you, it means different things. And
It
then
means
people
something.
can either ignore it or pay attention to it.
Well, and I don't know the Native American history probably the way that you do, as far as like culturally some of the things that they use in nature, but I do know that many indigenous people, specific to Native Americans, when someone would be sick, they would bury the body. They're alive, they're breathing, and they would
Mhm.
bury the body just at the surface level of the earth, head out, obviously breathing and aware, and allow the earth to kind of encase them. We
Okay.
know
Yeah.
now scientifically that there's an electron exchange that helps balance free radicals, that helps pull inflammation from the body. So we know that scientifically now. I'm sure there were other reasons, maybe even spiritual, that were
Yeah.
happening
Get close.
hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of years ago. But yeah, walking barefoot on the earth or touching and hugging plants and trees has a real biological benefit to us.
Well, just to even like I'm a Buddhist, and just the meditation of it, like
Mm,
like if you're not in the city, like I mean if I'm in Boston, they have that bustle of the city, or New York. You get in New Hampshire, you go into a deep,
mm,
and you just hear the brooks and the streams. You hear all the
mm.
animals, hear all the birds. You see the monarch butterflies flying around. And you're like, wow, that in itself, it starts to get your breathing under control, kind of like if I'm chanting, because I follow like a
Yes.
Nichiren Daishonin Japanese Buddhism, and I lived in Japan for 2 years from 2004 to 2006, and I practiced the
Mm,
Nichiren Daishonin type of Buddhism, which comes from Japan, and because my wife practiced it, and when I married her, we got into it, and then we ended up living in Japan for 2 years from 2004 to
mm.
2006. And the thing I loved about Japan was kind of the dichotomy of very modern high technology, but in the middle of the Tokyo, there's all these shrines, and there's all these
Yes.
places where you can do Tai Chi, and you can just kind of get away. And people during like lunchtime are in there meditating or doing Tai
Shoes
Chi, or
off.
just like, shoes off. Yeah, just in
Yeah.
there, just able to get away from it all, from the bustle of like one of the most busy cities in the world. And I was there
Yes.
doing like financial stuff. But I could go to one of these gardens, one of these temple areas, and you could kind of get out of that corporate mindset, and for a half hour be out of it. And that to me was very positive, to be able to go to a place like that in the middle of a bustling city. That I found that to be like a sacred space when I was there. But
Yes. And when you arrive in that sacred space, and I love how you just were like, I was in the middle of a bustling city and I could find a sacred space because I could find a place where the volume on the outside came down, leaving room for the volume of the inside. Divinely, we all have enough. We were put on this planet. We have enough. We know enough. We are enough. However we show up in the world is exactly how we should be showing up. And when you allow yourself to play in nature like that and literally be bathed, right, like encased and like wrapped, and almost just taking a few minutes to allow yourself to feel held in
mhm,
nature, it does, it comes to this place of sacredness where creativity and uniqueness that typically in the busyness and the noisiness of the external space you don't hear. When you allow yourself to be wrapped in that natural environment, you're like, oh, there it is. Oh, I'm
yeah,
allowing
it's
myself
like
to be
also
heard.
you could go to
Yeah.
the volcanic baths, like, you could go to the onsens near Mount Fuji, and it's a whole 'nother type of experience. You could see the snow monkeys, and then you could go to these natural volcanic springs, and the onsens are just unbelievable. It is like
Mm.
in the kind of the way the culture is, and you're in your kimono and you're in these hot springs, and it's very pastoral and it's very old
Yeah.
type of Japan kind of Shinto kind of culture. Structures of the houses are very kind of ancient, and even all the buildings are kind of Japanese Shinto style, older style, thousands of years old stuff. And it
Yeah.
just felt very calming. The whole time I was in Japan, I felt like I was just, the whole thing was like a vacation, even though I was doing a lot of heavy work. I just felt so at peace. And I mean, there were
Well,
earthquakes and there was all kinds of things, but I just, even when I was there, they had earthquakes, but I was like, I just was so happy.
you
I guess
tapped
to me, that
in.
was like the happiest time in my life.
Because you knew whether you were conscious of it or not, that it felt good with even the subtlest of shifts, right? Like even the smallest, even the just 30 minutes of the day or 10 minutes of the day or 5 minutes of the day to get into a space where you could slow down. And I think oftentimes
Yeah,
in sacred space, it is about um, not necessarily the pace, but a pace in which you can um, use the sense of feeling. Like I love what you're saying there, right? It's this idea of like, how often do you actually ask yourself, like, how do I feel right now? Am I in a space that is supportive of
mm,
how I want to feel? You know, we as Americans in particular, and those of us that are in cities or have had any sort of jobs, musicians or corporate jobs or anything in between, teachers, whatever. It's this always this
yeah,
buzz, and
yeah.
never do we pause to think, how do I feel, except to say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, my feet hurt, and whatever. And it's like, well, what if we actually took a little bit of sacredness, time, space, pause to actually try to create feelings that are in the direction that we want to be more like? And and that
Yeah.
subtle, my philosophy is it's not big things that need to happen. It's not a big long week vacation in Thailand. It's not a whole day of taking the day off and um, you know laying by the pool, that create lifestyle of managing one's health and wellness, right? It's more about how can I in my regular day create a lifestyle that allows me to have places where I can tap in to know that I'm taking care of myself. And you were saying you lived
What
there
you
for
call
2
like a
years and you did
subtle
that.
shift.
You did that. Oh, sorry?
Yeah. I mean, but what I'm saying is like when you mentioned what you just mentioned, I was reading about like your concept of like a subtle shift. Is
Yeah.
that what you have to do, is like learn how to like, it's not so dramatic. Like you said, you don't have to go to Bermuda, you don't have to go to Colorado Springs, you don't have to go do something like that to go mountaineering. You maybe you do, but what happens is like if you found peace, like as a Buddhist, we chant and we do breathing exercises, right? We do that like
Yeah.
every day. We don't just go to church on
Mhm.
Sunday. Every day we take time to
Yeah.
in a space to chant, maybe in the morning or at night. We do maybe 2 or 3 times a day. And it's like
Yeah.
a meditation kind of calming exercise. And we focus and we read some of the text. This is like it's like sacred text, but we read it and we meditate, and there's like lessons. It's really all ancient Eastern philosophies, and they
Yeah.
teach like lessons. There, a lot of them
Yeah.
are basically the cause of like cause and effect. Like the idea, if you put negative energy, you're gonna get negative energy back. You put positive energy, you're gonna get positive energy back. That you
Absolutely.
might be responsible for like the position you're in because of like things that happened even that were beyond your control. But you can try
Yeah.
to control whether you're going to be positive or negative, and you can
Yeah.
take that and shift
We
and
we
by
have a we have
breathing
a
and meditation.
we as humans get to choose, right? We get to choose, and we create our future by what we choose are our current thoughts. So you and I could equally be talking about something hateful right now as we are choosing to talk about things that are peaceful, or maybe instill an idea or just have an open conversation that might make someone go, oh, I could feel a lot better if I just took 5 minutes a day. Right. So in Buddhism, they don't say you have to sit for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing the same practices or reading the same text. They also don't say you just show up on every other Sunday and magic happens. They say, take a little bit of time today for these practices. Then tomorrow, take a little bit of time for these practices. So yeah, the idea of subtle shifts for me is if you could take for yourself 3 or 4 or 5 minutes every day. And oh, by the way, some of it might be things you're already doing, but you do more mindfully, like a mindfulness shift in the shower, like a coffee meditation. Like if you're outside walking the dog, like in your backyard, take your shoes off, right? If you're going to choose something else for lunch, maybe choosing an apple over chips, right? Like these are, they sound like tiny things,
Yeah.
but if every day you are
Yeah.
to, with awareness, choose to do something that moves you in the direction of how you want to feel, like being aware of
Yeah.
how
More
you want to
positive.
feel, like what is that? And you are to use some of these smaller practices, they're hugely impactful. I've had clients who hadn't slept for years, literally years, not sleeping. And we every day, 3, 4, 5 minutes of a mindfulness and meditation practice. 3, 4 months later, they're sleeping through the night. They didn't change anything else. They just took 2, 3, 4 minutes each day with some instruction and some guidance, but now they sleep. This is huge.
Well,
This
because
is
the
a huge
mind,
impact. It's the mind.
yeah, the
And that's,
mind can be racing about, yes, it's
yeah,
because it's so much like thought space, and the way we live and the kind of hyperactive, like always on. People don't
always
shut their
on.
cell phone off, right? They've got the text messages coming in at 2 in the morning. Tweets coming in. This your head's always on. It's like the one thing is like being a musician. Sometimes it's like I unplug from
Mm,
all the social media to create
mm,
my kind of artistic space. And every
yeah.
day I do rehearsal just because I like to keep my chops up, but it's also cathartic for me because I take
Mm,
whatever happened that day and I take those emotions, disconnect from all these, and I just go into the studio. And the thing is, I use a lot of analog synthesizers, and maybe that's hard to understand for people, but these are older technology that actually
mm,
has to warm up. It's not digital.
mm,
And what I find is these synthesizers, what I find it is people try to tame them and try to make them do what they want them to do, but they're
mm,
very variable and they'll do different things. What I've learned is I let them kind of tell me what they're going to say. And then I go
mm,
and I kind of just go off of it. And I just let them give me something and then I work with it. And it's kind of like I feel like their electricity, and people say like the ghost in the machine or it's something electric. So it has the guy who created Dr. Moog, Dr. Robert Moog said he felt that his machines had a consciousness. And if you read the
mm,
text and when you get some of his synthesizers, he felt like they had some kind of thing. And I feel they do because they every day they do something different. It's not like a
mm,
digital machine where it's like copying something that somebody did. These things create original waveforms that create sounds and they kind of just go off and they do things. And people are like, well, I can't control it. But I don't want to control it. I want it to actually give me something and then I use it.
it's what you just said in my world related to a practice that I love to use, and maybe your audience would enjoy this. I don't know. Everybody's so unique, you never know what's going to stick with people, but is the practice of not labeling. So imagine going for a walk in nature and you don't label with your intellect what it is you see. So when you see the oak tree, you say, whoa, that's a huge oak tree, or wow, look at that squirrel, or oh, I love moss, or oh, isn't that a beautiful leaf or a butterfly? Rather than labeling it, just see it, be with it, and let it tell you what it is. And this is what I'm hearing you say about your synthesizers, right? It's like, so a tree, we call it a tree, which by the way is just a word that humans have made up to have some sort of ability to communicate with each other, which is fascinating that we can communicate with each other when our mind wanders 50% of the time anyway. So I don't know. It's magical to me. But if you were to see that tree and not label it, what else, what could it tell you? Does it tell you that it's a house for animals? Does it tell you that it's shade? Does it tell you that it's an oxygen exchange machine? Does it tell you that it's a photosynthesis? Like, it's not just a tree. And we limit ourselves. We limit ourselves by labeling and judging. And what I hear you saying, and I love that we started with nature and now we're talking a little bit about your technology, and yet it's still all coming together, is you're not saying to it, hurry up, I need you to move faster. This is what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. You're actually looking at it and going, what are you going to give me today? Yeah. And I'm saying to your listeners, go out for a walk in nature and don't call it a tree. Let it tell you what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, because people will go on their cell phone, go out into the woods and try to, I'm going to find out what this plant is. Right. So I spend all the time taking pictures of it, trying to match it to some data when you could just look at it and actually say, well, I just love the way it looks. And I don't really know what it is. And it's, and then, there's a bug there. And what's that bug? I'm not going to go look it up. I'm just going to actually experience that bug. Because by the time you stop, go look it up, the bug probably left. Or maybe it was trying to tell you something. And maybe it was looking at you, or you missed it because you spent all your time trying to go on your phone. But the whole thing about being in nature, I found this monarch blood butterfly in the middle of this trail on the Merrimack Valley Trail. It was following the Merrimack River. And all these monarchs had been by these blueberry bushes. And they just had this little secret place where they all were. And I was like, wow, this is like one of their migrating stops. And there were like hundreds of thousands. There was tons of them. And I'd never seen so many. And I said, I didn't even take a picture. I said, you know what? I just sat there just looking at them. And then my wife said, why didn't you take the picture? I said, well, I was like, and I just didn't want to take it because I felt like I was in this thing. And it was kind of like that sacred moment because this was like a monarch practice. Yeah. And I was in the middle of something that was important to them. And I was just like, luckily I was able to be there and actually see it. And I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. Everybody's telling me, well, you should.
No, I'm feeling you in that moment. I'm like sensing what it would feel like to just stand and be and allow that monarch experience to offer you something. And, you allowed yourself to receive in that situation, and guaranteed you gave nature something back, right? If we step outside of our own little self, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on around us, and you being there was purposeful for something, right? I don't know, maybe you broke the wind and allowed the butterflies to come in, or maybe you provided shade to a spot on the ground that the butterflies had previously, I don't know, right? I have no idea why, but the idea that you could just be in that moment, sorry, it's a little bit of a sidebar, but I always laugh. Our names, we aren't human doings. We're human beings. Mm-hmm. The practice of being a person who can experience a sacred space and tap into their creativity and tap into their uniqueness is not about doing more. It's about being within ourselves, knowing that we're enough, and obviously using our intellect and our creativity to explore that, right? Like, well, how does this feel? Or if I take my shoes off in the grass, like that crazy lady that was on the Phantom Electric Ghost last night, like she said, how did I feel? Don't just take your shoes off and be like, this is ridiculous. I'm freezing. I'm in New Hampshire. No, like take your shoes off, put your feet in the grass and go, well, what do I feel? Right? So when you're in that experience with the butterflies, it's like, how does this feel? Like just allowing yourself to be a human being. You don't have to do something. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Like I used to tell you. It totally makes sense because I had a lot of friends that used to mountain bike with me, and they get mad because every time an animal would come up to me and I'd stop, they'd be like, they are using the mountain biking for like an aerobic exercise and they're timing themselves. And they're like, oh, I got to get here by this time. And if every animal come up to me and I stop, they're like getting mad because like, you're messing up my workout. But I'm like, I'm not just doing it for a workout. And like, I'm there because I like communing with nature. And sometimes, like
Yeah.
one time, this beaver came out of its dam area, and it just came. And it was talk, it was like chatting. It was making a. It wasn't getting mad. It was just chatting, and everybody said, "Oh, we should keep on going." I said, "Well, he's telling me something. I'm going to sit here." And I sat there for like 15, 20 minutes. Right? All my guy friends were like, "You're really taking me off." But I'm like,
Well, you know what?
when I'm out there, I just have to
What?
stop when something like that happens.
But why is it weird? Okay, like I get it. I can picture you out there with your guy friends and them just being like, "Oh my God, he's at it again." But why is it weird that you would want to stop and listen to what the beaver has to tell you, or that experience or that exchange you're having? Why is that any different than like how you might feel when you're listening to music? Right? Again, I go back to primordial sounds, right? And that like connection with nature. There is an exchange, there is a giving and a receiving going on. And if we can be more in our unique space and know how we want to feel being in that space, we learn so much more about ourselves and we learn so much more about others. And I think there's more compassion and more love and more kindness, not only to ourselves, but to those that are around us that we can actually share. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know,
I just
you know,
feel like animals. I love animals, and my daughter has a big love for animals. She's an artist too. She's a graphic artist,
mm,
and we've been like we always like to take a lot of time when we go for walks. And it kind of like the people around us. Sometimes they won't go with us because we take too much time. But it's kind of because we want to experience it, and we're not on the timetable to get to the next thing. Like the
yeah,
thing that we're doing is we're in the woods, and I'm not trying to get to like I want to go to the coffee shop after, and I gotta be
you're
there by X
being
time.
in
I
the
said I don't want
woods.
to. Yeah,
You're being in the woods. Yeah.
that's the whole
Hmm.
thing is to be in the woods. If I'm there 5 hours or like they want to be there like a half hour and to leave, and I'm like, no, I kind of want to really experience
Want
it.
to be
I
here.
don't know. Might be 3 hours, might be two, might be five. I don't know. It's going to be whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
some people today, they're so time focused, it's hard for them. They're like, I can't do that. I got to know when it's going to end.
Yeah.
you know, I think we
Yeah.
get too controlled, and that's like a problem because even with my music, people today, like all my A&R people say, well, you got to do a song in like 2.3 minutes. I said, well, sometimes I do a 5 minute, 15 minute, 20 minute song. And I don't know what I'm going to do. It's like, if that's what I like, that's what I'm going to do. And, I don't necessarily want to make it 2 minutes and 30 seconds just because that's
Mhm.
what's working. That's not what I'm going to
Mhm.
do. I'm going to do what deserves the song. If the
Yeah.
song deserves to be X number of minutes, it's going to be what it is. I'm not going to cut it down because you say you can't deal with it. I'm like, how do you? Because if you think about it, a song like Hotel California, they told them they couldn't do it. That's too long. Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury was told that was too
Right.
long,
That's what I was just
and
saying. Yeah.
he put it out on video because the record company said it was too long, and he spent the money, his own money, to put it on a video, and then the video got played all these stations all over the BBC, and then they forced it to get to the radio station because he believed in it. And he said that's what it is. It's not going to get cut down to 3 minutes because that's what you want. But that song is what it is. You know.
Well, and I think that's what really happens when you allow yourself to be open to following your own joy, to trusting that that what you have to say and what you have to do is enough. It's you're if you're a boy, you're not supposed to cry. If you're this, you're supposed to do that. There's all these rules that get put upon us. And I'm always encouraging the people that I'm working with to sure, there are some social norms and certain things. And if you're in the United States, you drive on the right and yeah, okay.
Yeah,
There are some collective social things that we do. And I wish part of it was more kindness, but there are certain things that have to be done. And so that a collective of people can all work together. But imagine if everyone was able to say what they really wanted to express. right? Or could be honest about a trauma in a life and be vulnerable. To express their unique way of doing something versus thinking, oh, no one's going to like it because most people like XYZ. The advancements in science, the beauty in the world, the connection amongst us, if we could be our own unique expression and be vulnerable, would it be exponential? I mean, it would be unbelievable to listen and hear what other people had to say and be able to make a connection with people that way. And sure, certain people are going to like your 13-minute song more than they like my 5-minute song, or they're going to like your daughter's graphic art different than their. But that's okay. The uniqueness of putting out everyone's individuality, to me, is what needs to be built for yourself in your own sacred space, and then having that vulnerability, that strength, and that bravery to share it with the world. And that's where it gets really sticky for a lot of people, right? That
Yeah.
sharing part.
Well, the problem is with the way the industry is today is you have a lot of people like to clone, like if I get into record music, right? Music, we have a lot of people like to sample, like to clone things that have been
Mm, mm,
successful. So they just want to
mm,
repeat the success. The thing
mm.
that they don't understand is like the innovations in music come from the people who are kind of cutting edge pioneers. Like the Jimi
Yeah,
Hendrixes, like the Jim Morrisons, Jazz Joplins, the Beatles, the Pink Floyds, like Miles Davis. These people who were willing to do fusion jazz was not looked at by other jazz people as something that was right. They said, "Well, that's not right. You shouldn't do that." And Miles said, "Well, that's
yeah,
the way I'm going," and then it became a thing. But
yeah,
the purest jazz people were like, "That's no good." And Bob Dylan went electric. People called him Judas. They said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And so to me, if you look at Hendrix with his feedback, people and engineers were like, "You can't put that on record," and he said, "That's staying there." And then that's when you get an innovator that's willing to push it and not
yeah.
necessarily not initially be popular, but eventually becomes like the standard. Because Hendrix,
Well, and
the
you
way
have to.
he recreated guitar, I mean, that's the way people play guitar. That's how electric guitar players do it. But before that, they didn't do it that way.
Right.
You know.
Well, and you have to educate me on this, because one of the things that I do with my work, and I'm not a professional artist. I mean, I strum this really handsome mini Taylor, but that's that's about all I have. Is when I talk to people, it's not everybody's going to be a Jimi Hendrix, right? Not everybody's going to be the Beatles. Not everybody's going to be a Whitney Houston. Not everybody's going to be whoever, right? And
Hmm.
and so, what if we weren't aiming for anything? What if all
Yeah.
we were aiming for was creating from our own sense of that feels good? This feels good to me, because if it feels good to you, it probably feels good to somebody else also. And so what if and I know in an industry where you're like trying to make money and be seen and be heard, like it's probably hard to wrap around that, right? But
Yeah.
doesn't the most success come from following your own, this makes me feel
Yeah.
good versus, yeah, tell me,
Well,
educate me on
but
this.
if you think about it, like, Hendrix was Hendrix because he did exactly what you said. He wasn't trying to be like anybody else. He was
Mhm.
just trying to be the best version of himself. So the lesson I learned from Hendrix was the fact was that he just wanted to play music. He didn't care where. He just, he just had to feel that he
Right,
had to do it. That he did it
right.
because he loved it. He used to have his guitar with him in his bed because he couldn't stop playing it. And so
Yeah,
the whole point with a guy like Hendrix was not that he was trying to be Jimmy Page or be better than McCartney, be better than Eric Clapton. He just felt like I need to do music because music is me. Right.
yeah,
And what I find is musicians who do well are the ones who are confident in themselves and choose to go their own path. And I'm very
yes,
much into promoting people who are very independent in the cutting edge emerging area that I
mm,
just mostly talk to emerging artists that I find very interesting. I don't look at
mhm,
the people in the top 20, 10, top 10. Try to find the people who I think are going to be the next like Lou Reed, the next Miles Davis, but nobody knows who they are because I've been
mhm,
listening to them in the underground. And I'm
mhm.
like a DJ or a radio guy. I like to listen to what's new. And
Mhm.
what's new is like at the bottom 500, the bottom 1,000 of the chart. That's where all the cool stuff is to me,
That's neat. Yeah.
because where that's all eventually that stuff ends up suddenly hitting you get like a Kurt Cobain, you get an Eder, you get a Trent Reznor, you get somebody who does something unique. And you get a guy like Michael Stipe. And when he first started, they say, "Oh, he's mumbling." REM. They're like, you can't tell what he's saying. And but it became that they went from IRS to Warner Brothers. They got super big, and
Yeah.
people would have never thought that a guy you couldn't actually hear his enunciation, right?
Right.
But he was
Was going to
doing
be
something
huge.
so unique. Yeah, he was doing something so unique. All the people were telling him, "You got to tighten up that enunciation. That stuff's no good." But it became classic. The
Yeah.
Reckoning and Murmur, those records are considered classic.
Classics. Well, you
It
said
was not exactly against what you were supposed to do.
you just used a really powerful word. The word you used was listen, right? They're listening to themselves. Jimi Hendrix was listening to himself. And by listening to himself and knowing how it feels, he became hugely successful. And I think what you're saying there about your curiosity and desire to see the uniqueness is what artists like that really need, right? Is this idea that, okay, if I listen to myself and I do my best and I follow my heart and my soul, it will resonate with someone else because it's so genuinely true, right? And I think
Mhm.
we see when people, and I'm sure this is true with all artists and specifically musicians, when someone's like trying to pretend they're something and they're not, you know,
You can
you know
feel it.
when it is, and
Yeah,
they're
you can
not
tell.
listening to themselves. They're not being their natural self. They're trying to do something that fits a hole and a round peg over here. And that idea of listening into that uniqueness and creating and living in that sacred space of yourself is, I think what's pretty powerful. I mean, that's what you're listening for, from what
Yeah.
I can tell.
Yeah, as a producer, when I find somebody, there's a couple of ways of being a producer. There's some producers that have a magic formula. They've got a bunch of riffs. They got a bunch of they actually write the music. They get an
Mm,
artist. They go and try to take that artist and put them and make them a clone of like 20 producers today to get into the top 20. They're basically just they get a lot of money from cloning their own stuff and then putting other people
mm,
into it. And then they keep on getting the royalties from all the repeated beats and lines that they keep on getting money from. They get royalties from. So there's a method to their madness. The reason why they're doing it. But my
mhm.
point as a producer is, if I get a demo from an independent artist and I hear something really unique, I'm not going to turn them into Phantom Electric Ghost because there's already a ghost, right? I want them to be the best demo. I want them to already. I want to take that demo and make it sound like the best version of themselves. I'm going
Mhm.
to make the vocals sound better, but I'm not really going to really alter it. I'm just going to make it sound better. Make the drums sound better. Make everything sound better. And maybe point things out or push things up or push things down, but it's going to sound closer to the demo than a lot of producers would do. In my
Yeah.
opinion, that gets you a more authentic artist because you take
Mhm.
their demo and you put the shine on it. And that to me is not having my ego try to turn them into me. You know,
Mhm.
I don't need
Mhm.
to turn them into another me. That's not the point.
Yeah. It makes me think about something I say often, which is our thoughts create our future. So the way that we think lays out the path of our life. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to hit a pothole or something's not going to come up that you really wish didn't, right? I also like to think of potholes as opportunities, but it's that idea of, for someone like you, it's like, really, please show up in your demo as you create the thoughts, create the music by which you want your future to be defined. And when somebody is showing up as their authentic self and they're being creative in their own way, the path of life is a lot more joyful because what's going to be created is based on your current thoughts, by your current actions. And so if you're trying to be somebody you're not, and 10, 20 years down the line, you're still not happy, it's because you've created something that's not you. And so I love what
Yeah.
you're saying. It's like you're taking something that is uniquely somebody else's, and you're like, I'm going to help you shine a light on that. And that might mean I got to turn the bass down a little and just a little more vocal, but it's still their unique painting. You're not trying to make this black and white, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I want
Basically
that
just,
blue.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an opinion of what you think would be there, but you're taking the core original
Hmm.
um material and not really totally. Some producers would take things and radically shift it. They'll take
Yeah.
something and like cut it up and move
Hmm.
it all around, and it's barely recognizable as to what the person actually originally wrote. And
Mm,
you wouldn't even know that that's what they wrote. And
yeah.
that's a different type of technique. And they come in from like a top down that they know better than the artist. And my point
Mm,
is, I think there's a lot of artists, just because I look at the history of music and I look at the artists I really like, and they were the
mhm,
ones who pushed for their voice to be heard, like Dylan. He went and learned. He first channeled Arlo Guthrie and Woody Guthrie. That's what he sounded like. Then he actually found his own voice. And when you
mhm,
get to like Highway 61, you get to Blonde on Blonde, he suddenly has this nasal kind of character that he created. And it's
mhm.
uniquely him. It doesn't sound like Arlo or Woody Guthrie anymore. He actually found his voice.
Found his voice.
And then yeah. So
Well,
that's,
what's so interesting, right, is it's okay to look around us for inspiration. We started the conversation this way. We looked to nature for inspiration. You and I are also both nature. There's no reason I can't look at you and go, "Oh, that looks interesting what he's doing." And the difference is what's over there that I can look at, that I can bring into me and make mine.
yeah.
Prior to doing what I do, I had an interior design business. Prior to that, I did so anyway. I've morphed a few times, but in the interior design business, what I really was about was wanting to create spaces people love to live in. I still do that. It just tends to be
Mhm.
more in the mind, body, heart, and soul kind of thing. But I always wanted to create spaces that people love to live in. And I had a professor in design school that said to me, there's nothing new. Okay. You're not going to create like a new chair. Everything's always going to have four legs. There's nothing that hasn't already been done. The difference is
Mhm.
what you bring to the design, the way you integrate with the client, the way you, um, add your own pizzazz or uniqueness to the space is what makes it defining you. It's what makes you good at what you do, and that uniqueness some people are going to like and some people aren't going to like, and that's okay. And so when
Yeah.
somebody's
Yeah.
looking for inspiration through nature, through design, through music, through previous artists, through the way the sun sets, the way a butterfly flies, I don't know, the taste of a cup of tea, whatever, take inspiration from the world around you, but then know how you want to feel and integrate it into your own uniqueness so you can be you and show that to the world. And I think what you're saying is interesting because it applies to everything. And so whether we're talking to a bunch of musicians here, or I know it's probably musicians, right? It's like I would say to those musicians, like, take that beauty of what you want to create in your music and live your whole life that way. Take that inspiration
Yeah.
and creativity and uniqueness and live your whole damn life that way, you know?
Well, I
Your
think it's even in
relationship.
my day. Yeah.
Say
Well,
sorry,
I
sorry,
think
hon.
no, what I'm saying, even in the day job, like on my day job is I do like a lot of like information technology. And
Mhm.
within our world, we design systems. And
Okay.
we have parameters of how we do stuff. But like one of the best bosses I've ever been were the ones that allow the designers and software coders they kind of have their unique take on something.
Yeah.
And as long as it hits the design, they don't try to micromanage it, right? They let them get to that design and let them get to it. And as long as it's actually going to hit it, then it hits it. And what I find it's the same kind of thing in music. If you get like, if you have a producer that says like, I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm not going to go and be every little note on the bar I'm going to criticize.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like not as happy a session, if you're getting red marked on every little thing rather than letting somebody like, okay, let me at least express it and then tell me. Don't just like keep on start and stop, start and stop. Like
Yeah.
let it actually be a complete piece. And
Yeah.
I've
And
seen
you
it
miss
in
the
business
beauty.
and all kinds of ways. Yeah.
You miss the beauty. If everything is like, this is the box it has to fit and this is the only way to do it, you lose the innovation. You lose, I always say there's never failure, it's only feedback. So what if something doesn't work? So cool, it's not a failure. It's like, okay, why didn't that work? How can we, what can we take? What's the opportunity we can take from that?
Well,
And I
failure
know
is
there's
how
no
you win.
lines. What's that? What'd you
You
say?
have to fail. When you're a
You have to fail.
musician, you fail like 9 out of 10 compositions as a musician usually don't make it. It's like 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100, you fail all the time. Musicians like artists, we fail constantly. Thing is you have to not take it personal because it's like it's a part of your growth. As a musician, as your first compositions, you by the time you get 10 years in the game, you're playing better. Your capability as a musician better. So what you wrote before, there might be some gems because of moment in time gems that happen where they say it doesn't really matter where you are as a musician. Sometimes you just have something that's like boom, it just happened. And so
Yeah.
that's a little bit out of the game. But when you progress, you get better. And as you get better, you end up being able to have more consistent work. But
Mm,
yeah, it is kind of like you throw it at the wall, and sometimes why? I mean, this is one of the things I always tell people: like you could be holding on to 100 songs, and personally, as an artist, you think song 52 is the best one, right? And then you just work on 52, and you never show anybody the other 100. And guess what? The way musicians are, that the number 52 is what you like, but your fans like number 18, but you never showed them 18, and then you never get anywhere. So my whole thing is you got to show them as much as you can because you have no idea what your fans are actually gonna like.
I mean, didn't Madonna say it best? Express yourself.
Yeah,
Express
you gotta throw
express yourself.
you can't just like keep everything in the shelf because a lot of
Right.
times artists don't
Get it out.
have an they're not the best judge of what their work is. And
I
sometimes you
agree.
have to let some of your work come out. Even the stuff that you think if you asked a lot of artists, if you watch documentaries, tons of artists have said, "Yeah, this hit, I wasn't even gonna put it out. My manager had to force me to put it out because I thought it was no good. The song I wanted went nowhere, but the song
Mhm,
the fans like is the one I was never even gonna put out."
mhm.
And so that's like a lesson to a lot of artists is like you really gotta be careful, especially when you get independent of like not allowing your work to hit the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true of our stories too, and who we are in life and sharing, um, different pieces of our journeys. When there's a diagram where it's a circle and there's a little dot in it, and it's basically like this is what everybody, if this is your whole life and there's one little dot, it's like that's what everybody knows about you is just that one little dot. There's so much more to us as beings and things that we like. I mean, I'm even thinking about what I learned about you today, and how you love nature and your daughter and how you guys, share time there and things like that, right? And it's like, okay, if you only show them thought number 52, if you only show them, worker bee number 52, if you only show them you're a student, if you only show them you're a mom, the one, you're stifling your own creativity and your own expression of self and your own ability to like learn and grow and fall down and fail and try again. And you're also starving the world of all the beauty that you have within you. And so, yeah, show them song 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 20, right? Like show the world all of you and be proud of who it is. And so whether it's a song or it's a thought or it's a story or it's a relationship or something in between, show the world who you are.
Yeah, that's the one benefit today because the way the world is like because of TikTok, because of Reels, musicians, we can actually put out a lot of our ideas
Oh
in a
yeah.
way industry would have never let us do. And I was talking
Yeah.
to a bunch of artists before, it's because you have these Reels, because you have these YouTube shorts, you have TikTok, as musicians, like we're starting to look at it and say, yeah, I can actually put out little snippets of my work. And I was talking to a
Mm,
bunch of them, was like, yeah, I'm actually on a strategy of putting out 3 to 5 pieces of work a week. It just
mm,
on these social media platforms because I'm getting crazy engagement that I never thought I
yeah.
was gonna get. And it really goes to show that, like, people if you engage your audience and you have a fan club and they actually get dedicated fans that actually like to see that coming, they actually get into it, and the way social media is, it's actually, having content is actually the point. And
Mm,
the
mm.
old world of waiting for an artist for a year
For the
to
whole
have that song
album.
or that album. Yeah, that's like old world. That's like 1980s. That's like not what's happening today. If you
Don't
wanna
don't
do
s
what's
don't
happening
say that
today.
don't say that's old. Don't say the 80s
Well,
are
I
old.
understand. Well, I'm 55, so I'm a child of the '70s, and when people were telling my dad my daughter is like, "Dad, you don't understand TikTok. When you do a TikTok, it's not gonna work, because the way you do TikTok is like, you need to look at what works in TikTok." I said, "Yeah, that's a good idea." I
That's
actually
yeah,
had
you
to
need her
watch what she was
advice.
telling me.
My son was telling me I was Snapchatting wrong the other day. "No, you don't Snapchat your whole face. You have to Snapchat, like, a piece of your face." I'm like, "Why? What is"
Yeah, I wasn't doing it right. So she was
I
like,
don't get
"Dad,
it
if you
either.
want to work, yeah, you gotta do it like this." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know." I was gonna throw it out there the same way I throw it on Instagram, or it's like, "No, that's not gonna work." It's like, "Oh, I didn't know the aesthetic." It's like, what's the TikTok aesthetic?" So you gotta learn how to do it right. But,
Oh,
yeah, the young people, I was like,
oh.
I'm still, like, in my head thinking that's gonna work for just 'cause it worked 20 years ago. But, yeah, I think I just find that being a creative person, I just like to do what I call expansive.
Mm,
So when I do expansive
mhm.
things, when people try to pin us down in our industry and say, "What genre are you?" They try to say, "Oh, are you trance? Are you EDM? Are you hip hop?" And then I come out and tell them, "I'm expansive." It's like, "What does that mean?" Well, it means, like, if I want to channel Johnny Cash, I can. If I want to channel Nine Inch Nails, if I want to sound like the Ramones, if I want to do some Sun Ra, if I want to do Funkadelic, it's whatever I feel like. And
Yeah.
so then I have a cross genre expansive sound is that I can kind of do any genre that fits the song, right?
Mhm.
And so it doesn't have to be tied. And people, well, how am I going to market that? It's like, well, because it's just for everybody. It can happen at any time. And if you think about it, some genres like new wave was a combination of punk, progressive rock, a little reggae, ska. It had everything. And people didn't say, "Well, what genre are you? What you new wave?" And new wave was like very encompassing. It had a lot of different aspects to it. And so that's why I try to tell people that you don't have to be so narrow in your
Yeah.
niche. You can
Yeah.
you can actually be more expansive and not be stuck in one thing. And I think I can to multiple parts of life.
Well, I and it was like what you were saying, it's like if you're sampling music, right, and it's song if you have 100 songs in your repertoire and you're only playing number 52 because you think people aren't looking for more country, but you've got 18 country songs, and the way that social media is working and the technology is working, you could have multiple pieces out there. Who knows what one's going to bite or which one lands up being picked up. And so I think a lot of these things, and I think whether it's you're a musician or you're a business person, so much of this is driven by our fear and our the fear of like, well, how will I be judged? I mean, isn't that like
Mhm.
what
Yeah,
steals
yeah.
most people's creativity is their fear of being judged. And that's going to happen. We're all gonna be judged. This conversation is gonna be judged. What I'm wearing is gonna be judged. How I walked today is gonna be judged. Everything's gonna be judged. And at the end of the day, the only person that really has the right to judge is yourself. And if you're stifling yourself and you're not allowing yourself to be creative and you're not living in a sacred space and you're not making subtle shifts towards a life that's full of more joy and less fear, you're doing not only yourself a disservice, the world. And as musicians, it's like art, right? So you're doing
Sure.
a disservice by not putting out. what it is that you want to offer. And so, fear is a tricky thing because I think fear is false evidence appearing real. FEAR, false evidence appearing real. And I think that
Oh,
fear is some whack-a-mamie stuff that we've put in our minds because somebody told us we weren't enough or something. And it's typically something that's happened in the past that is no longer currently in the present. And if you can think of fear as false evidence appearing real and kind of smile and laugh at that, and then decide to take a step forward and just try something out and be vulnerable, the world has benefited. You've made a subtle shift. You've stepped into sacred space, and I hope more artists do that. I hope more people do that.
yeah. Well, I think it's like art, yeah, whether you're a musician, an actor, a painter, a poet. I think when you realize that the fear of the hater or the person who's going to give you the critic, that's going to give you like the really destructive criticism, that like it, it tears at your. Listen, I always tell people when I'm working with younger artists is like when you, as soon as you put this down, you're going to have some person say they hate it. You can't take that personal because like the way the world is now, somebody in your neighborhood might say they hate it, but somebody in Tokyo, somebody in Iceland, somebody in Latvia might love it. And so
Yeah.
you can't just judge by your where you live. I said you need to think bigger than your hood, bigger than your
Mhm.
neighborhood, bigger than the
Yeah.
US, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you think that making it is just making it in your hometown, that's not the way the world is with creative people today. You can make it on the net and it's worldwide. And you can get
Mhm.
fans and suddenly you're going to the Netherlands or you're going to Australia
Right.
because you got people that like you there. That's the
Wasn't
way it
it
works
David?
today. So you can't be afraid.
Isn't it David Hasselhoff? Isn't it David Hasselhoff who's like huge in Germany or was huge in Germany,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
this
but
is
he
it.
he
Yeah,
didn't make it
yeah,
here at all. Like, and that was pre-technology. Like, come on.
yeah.
That's our
I mean, you
generation,
you
right?
never know yeah, you never know where your niche is gonna be. You can have a lot of fans in different corners of the world, and you can end up doing tours being a musician. That only like the big company, you gotta have 1,000,000 fans. You gotta have 2,000,000 fans. But there are artists that can survive at 50,000, 100,000 fans because they'll actually
Sure.
tour to where the people want to see them. And then they basically, you don't go beyond your means, but you can
Sure.
actually still get to be a musician. You just got
Yeah.
to scale to the level and go to where your audience is, and then sell to that audience. And so the idea of mega success, you got to look at success within your own capability, and not
Yeah.
judge it based on what somebody else is doing. Like you got to see what you can do yourself and what you feel comfortable with, and you can be an artist for a longer period of time than you would think, than what people would tell you can. Because in the indie world, you can survive at a lower level of volume in
Mhm.
multiple ways.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's so interesting speaking with you how relatable the using music. I mean, it has to be so vulnerable to put a paintbrush on a canvas and be like, does anybody want to buy this?
Sure.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and and as an artist, a musician, you're doing the same thing. I mean, yes, I play this guitar, but I play this guitar for my own satisfaction. And at Thanksgiving, I'll probably pull it out and play a few Luke Bryan songs because it only requires like 2 or 3 chords that I know: C, G, E major, E minor, E major. A few chords that I can kind of
yeah,
one strum through, and if you sing along, you're fine. Um, but it is really about leaning into that vulnerability. And if you're interested in being in that environment, right, and you want to be a musician, if you're not working on how comfortable am I being vulnerable and how comfortable am I being me, to me, those things are more important than probably your actual capability as a musician. Because I know a lot of really, not personally, but I know a really lot of successful musicians that they're not actually really that great as singers. They're actually not that great of instrument, right? Like we could list some of those people, but they have been
yeah.
willing to put themselves out there. And I don't know, maybe you would say that's not true, but
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, I was very No, it's true because there's a really fantastic female singer I've been really into, singer songwriter Liz Fair. Her voice is not the most perfect female voice in music, but
Mm,
she has a very independent and honest story that she likes to tell in her music.
mm,
And in that way, she's a great singer songwriter. And she doesn't have like a 5 octave. She doesn't have
mhm.
like character, but she's got the guts to do kind of like a punk aesthetic, tell the world in the way she really feels. She's totally dead honest in her music,
Yeah,
and really shows a lot
yeah,
is very vulnerable. She shows a lot of her personal life in her music, and she's actually written stories where, yeah, I'm actually telling you something that's really deep. And I've always been very impressed with songwriters that are willing to do that because
mhm,
that puts it is a vulnerability. You're putting yourself out there, but
yeah,
that's the talent of a really good singer songwriter. Is that is their core talent is they can actually pull
mm,
from inside universal story.
mm,
And that to me, it can with all people, even though it's personal, because other
mm,
people feel that way. And
yeah,
that's what we tap into is you can tap into those universal feelings and you put yourself out there and you have to be able to handle it. You know, it is can be damaging if you don't know how to handle it right. But it is it's part of the nature of being an artist.
yeah. I mean, it's what we did in the book Sacred Spaces, which is how you and I connected, right? I mean, it's not music, it's storytelling, which is a form of music. The book just doesn't have musical notes to it, right?
Music sounds
And the stories are very vulnerable. Yeah, right. They're very, very vulnerable, raw stories of things that have happened in people's lives. And then the practices or the tools that they've used to kind of go through their own healing and their own journey. And vulnerability opens up
Vulnerability opens up.
connection and healing in a way that I've never experienced before. And I don't do it through music, I do it through writing. Um, but you then
it's
start to
not that
kind of
different.
find
I
your
think
tribe. You know, you find your tribe where you're like, okay, these people support me because I'm vulnerable. And it's not like you're not the only one out there being vulnerable. And you start to kind of come together. And it's you take the one step and it's like, wow, the world opens up. The world opens up a little bit, I think.
well, I believe like all musicians, like singer songwriters, we're writers, right? It just happens that we have a music going behind our writing, but
Mhm.
we a lot of us start as poets. You know, a lot. I actually
Mm,
used to do poetry readings in Northampton, Mass, before I got into music, and I started to
mm,
merge it. But I do respect like all writers because I think like the vulnerability of an author or a short story writer or a journalist, you know, in terms of just telling the truth or getting their
yeah,
story out and the uniqueness of their voice. Um, to
right.
me, is like singer songwriters. We do all do the same things. You know,
We're all doing the same
we
thing.
put it out there. It's just a different like we might have a instrument with it, but you have that voice, and that voice is authentic, and it has that honesty to it, and it resonates, and still it's still
Yeah,
creative. It's
yeah.
so I think that's what we're all in the creative space of being a creator.
I think so too, and I
I
think what we're
I think
all
so too, and I
desperately
think
looking for is connection. We're all looking for connection, right? We're all looking for that community. We're all looking for acceptance. We're all looking to be appreciated. I think that we want to be seen, like as human beings, we want to be seen, and our expression and our way of kind of looking for that is through some sort of written or sung word. Um, and I think what we have to be careful about is what we define appreciation as. And appreciation doesn't necessarily mean you're on like the world stage, right? Appreciation
Mhm.
could be one person's life was affected by your song, or one person's life was affected by your story, or your own life was affected by your song or your story. And so that definition of what's enough, I think, is where the whole
Yeah.
thing gets a little slippery, you know?
Well, yeah, it's like I was talking to somebody that was like a financial person, and they were like, you know, like a crypto person and get big profit. And then they looked at my numbers. They said, "Well, well, why would you want to keep on doing that? Because you need to make X to do this. And I said, well, what you don't see from these numbers, the fact that I get opportunities to work with other artists, that I get the opportunities to work with like video game developers on soundtracks. You don't see that in my number. You
Mm,
don't see the fact that I get to do sync licensing that you might not know because maybe I use a different name. So like on the face of it, they were just looking at raw numbers and making a judgment that was more, economic rather than
yes.
artistic. And first of all, like if you're an artist, like, look at Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. They never made any money in the time they were active from 66 to 70. It's
Yeah.
only after he worked on Transformer and he did Walk on the Wild Side and he suddenly broke. But he was breaking with something that he had been writing about from 66 to 70. He just
Yeah.
worked with Bowie, and Bowie's producers finally got it pushed to the right audience. But that classic work he did from 60 actually launched most of the indie alternative artists from like the 80s and 90s. Name
Mm,
check out an inspiration for all these other bands. Like the Beatles
mm,
were inspiration for tons of bands. So sometimes being just an artist, your inspiration. William Blake is a good example. He's one of the greatest Victorian poets, but in his time, nobody knew him. He was found
mhm.
after he was done. Nobody knew about William Blake in his own time. And
Yeah.
so just because you're not known in time doesn't mean you shouldn't do the work
Right.
because somebody might find your work,
Yeah.
and it might have an impact.
Yeah, I think we're constantly impacting people. I think the ripple is huge, and you never know like what one smile in the grocery store is going to do for, five people removed from that smile. And it's I think it's why it's so important that the thoughts that you think, the actions that you take create your future. And so what's your responsibility for that, not only for yourself but for others? And if you're a writer or an artist or a musician, and you actually have a product that goes out that can, be a tangible piece of the
Mhm.
ripple, I actually think we're responsible to do it. I actually think you're put on the
Yeah.
earth to shine your talents, and it goes beyond, oh, I'm scared, or oh, no, I'm like, no, no, it's your responsibility to contribute to the collective in a way that is um, beautifying and supportive, and maybe even encouraging to someone else, because there's someone watching you that wants to do something, and they feel scared or they feel afraid, but they see you do it and they're inspired by it, and it allows them to kind of step into their creative space. And so if you're not showing more than song 52, you're not being responsible. You know? Get out
And
there.
also, like, you don't let age kind of tell you what you can do because a lot of people will say music is a young person's game,
51,
and I'm
51 years
55.
old. 51. I'm
I'm
51 years
55,
old.
and Peg didn't start kicking until 2016, right? In 2016, all the things I'd ever done didn't really get the impact that now that Family Electric goes. It started in 2016, and it actually has had more impact than any other project I've ever worked on. And
Mm,
it would tell you like, well, the I worked on when I was 17, 18, 22, 23. A lot of my friends who are musicians, they stopped because by the time they were 25, they didn't kick. And they said, well, I'm
ah,
done. And then I just kept on going because I just like playing. And I just said, I'm going to
mhm.
keep on playing because I like to. And then
Yeah.
eventually my time happened way, way after what they say you should be doing.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it tells you like the lesson I tell other people is like you should just do the music because you love to do it, not
You
that you're
love it.
trying to do X or Y or Z. And then things will happen. But if you love anything you love to do, whether you're an author, poet, um,
Do it.
actor, you might not break until you're my age. But if you do it because you love it and you're doing all these off Broadway plays and you're doing small productions and suddenly somebody sees you, if you stop and you just say it's over, no one will ever see you. So
Yeah.
that's why I always just keep on doing what you love because the world will eventually kind of come to where you are, and you just keep on doing what you can do, and then things tend to work out. That's the way I have a positive feeling about that. That's the way I am
I I love that. I like to call it follow the fun. Follow the fun. If you're enjoying it, keep going. You know, and it's all this human construct too. It's like, who says what's too old?
Yeah.
Who from whom are we taking the direction of that? It's crazy.
Well, A&R people. Well, they have a job. I understand they have a job. They're looking for all the 17-year-old kids to break, to
Oh, from a
get them
music,
out
from
there.
like
They
a
want,
big music perspective. Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
yeah, yeah. When you're in the initial game, it's a young person's game because
Yeah.
that's what the industry likes to do. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that, because like you go into country genres, you go into jazz genres, you can be like, you go into the blues guys are like 70, 80, 90. It doesn't
They're
matter if you're
cooler
in the
that
blues.
way.
Delta blues guys, it doesn't, there's no limit. Like if you want to be into Delta blues, it's like, it's actually more authentic if you're like 78. You know, but you know, but so it's like that then it means you really went to the crossroads. You really did it.
You
But
made it.
uh,
Mm,
but we do
just
have to
hope
cut
for
it
us.
off right at this time. I do love our
I know. I'm sure we're
conversation.
talking away.
It went to a different zone, but our distributors like to have a certain size of a podcast, so we're kind of limited. But I do want to encourage people to go to the website I've had up on the bottom, so they can check out your work. And this will be clickable when we fully publish. And so you'll be able to click that and go to that website on the published versions on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all those places. That will be clickable. So that would be, I think, I encourage people to the URLs of the that we have on the show and support the work that they're doing. And I hope that everybody will check out your work and really connect with you.
Oh, well, this has been so fun. I kind of forgot we were even like live doing this, just enjoying the conversation. And yeah, if anybody feels the same connection or wants to talk more, reach out. I hope they'll do the same with you. And I feel so blessed for being here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you and have a great night.
You too. Take care.